My name is Carmen Rosa Morales, and I'm 65 years old. Today I need to share with you the heaviest secret I've carried in my heart for over 5 decades. If you're watching this, maybe you also know what it feels like to carry pain that seems too heavy for one person to bear. I was 8 years old when my world changed forever. We lived in a small house in the Comuna 13 of Medellín, my mother Maria and I. My father had abandoned us when I was 3, leaving us with nothing but broken promises and empty dreams. My mother worked as a seamstress, her fingers bleeding from the needle pricks, trying to put food on our table. That's when Roberto appeared in our lives like an answer to my mother's prayers. He was tall, well-dressed, with hands that smelled of motor oil and aftershave. He fixed cars in the neighborhood and always had coins in his pockets for the children. When he smiled at my mother, her tired eyes would light up like candles on Christmas Eve. "Mija," my mother would whisper to me while braiding my hair. "God has finally sent us an angel." I believed her. At 8 years old, I believed everything my mother told me. Roberto courted her with yellow roses and promises of a better life. He would bring me little gifts, candies, hair ribbons, a small wooden cross that I wore around my neck. "You're going to be my little princess," he would say, ruffling my hair with those big hands of his. The wedding was small but beautiful. My mother wore her grandmother's white dress, altered to fit her tiny frame. I scattered rose petals from our neighbor's garden, feeling like I was in a fairy tale. Finally, we would be a real family. But fairy tales, my dear friends, sometimes turn into nightmares when the lights go out. It started 3 weeks after the wedding. Roberto offered to help me with my homework, while my mother prepared dinner in the kitchen. "Come sit on my lap, pequeña," he said, patting his knee. "Let me show you how to hold the pencil properly." His hands covered mine, guiding the pencil across the paper. But then those hands began to wander. First my arms, then my shoulders, then places where no grown man should ever touch a little girl. "This is our special game," he whispered in my ear, his breath hot and strange. "But it's a secret game, just between us. If you tell anyone, they won't understand. They might even blame you." I was 8 years old. I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew it felt wrong. My stomach would twist into knots whenever I heard his footsteps approaching my room. But he was my stepfather now. He was supposed to take care of me, wasn't he? The touching became routine, always when my mother was cooking, cleaning, or hanging clothes outside. Always with that same whisper. Our little secret, Carmen Rosa. Good girls keep secrets. I started having nightmares. I would wake up crying, and my mother would hold me, stroking my hair. "What's wrong, mi amor?" she would ask. But the words would stick in my throat like thorns. How could I explain something I didn't even understand myself? At school, my grades began to fall. I couldn't concentrate. Sister Esperanza, my teacher, would call me a daydreamer, but I wasn't dreaming. I was disappearing inside myself, trying to find a safe place where Roberto's hands couldn't reach me. I remember one afternoon, I was playing with my doll, a small thing with braided hair that looked like mine. Roberto found me and said, "Let me show you how to play a new game with your doll." That day I understood that what he was doing to me wasn't normal. That day, I stopped being a child. Every night I would kneel beside my bed and pray to the Virgin Mary. "Please, Virgencita, make him stop. Please protect me." But the touching continued, and I began to wonder if God could hear the prayers of little girls, or if he only listened to grown-ups. My mother was so happy. She would hum while cooking, smile while sewing. Roberto bought her a new dress, fixed our leaking roof, brought meat for Sunday lunch. She was living her dream of having a good husband, a provider, a man who would take care of us. But her dream was becoming my nightmare, and I was too small, too afraid, too confused to know how to wake her up. The secret grew heavier each day, like a stone in my chest that made it hard to breathe. I started avoiding Roberto, hiding when I heard him coming home from work, but a child can only hide for so long in a small house. And the man who was supposed to be my protector had become the monster I needed protection from. Years would pass before I understood that the little girl with braided hair and a wooden cross around her neck was slowly dying inside. replaced by someone who learned that silence was survival, and that sometimes the people who are supposed to love us are the ones who hurt us most. There are wounds that don't bleed externally, but internally they destroy us drop by drop. My dear friends, what I'm about to tell you happened over 8 long years, but some moments burn so clearly in my memory that it feels like yesterday. By the time I turned 10, Roberto's games had become part of my daily routine, like brushing my teeth or saying my prayers. Except prayers began to feel empty, and Roberto's presence filled me with a terror that no child should ever know. He was clever, that man. He knew exactly when my mother would be at the market, when she'd be visiting Doña Carmen next door, when she'd be hanging clothes on the roof. Those were his hunting hours, and I was always his prey. "Carmen Rosa," he would call from the living room, and my blood would freeze. "Come help me fix this radio." There was never anything wrong with the radio. There was everything wrong with what happened next. I learned to recognize the sound of his footsteps, the way he cleared his throat before calling my name, the smell of his cologne mixed with cigarettes. My body would go rigid with fear, but my 8-year-old legs would carry me to him anyway, because disobeying adults was unthinkable in our house. "You're such a good girl," he would whisper afterward, always giving me a coin or a piece of candy. "Our secret is safe, isn't it?" And I would nod, because good girls keep secrets. Good girls don't make trouble for their families, but my body started to rebel in ways I couldn't control. I stopped eating properly. Food would stick in my throat like sawdust. My mother would worry, force-feeding me spoonfuls of sancocho, saying I was getting too skinny. "Niña, you need meat on your bones." She'd fuss, not knowing that my appetite had died along with my sense of safety. The nightmares came every single night. I would dream of hands reaching for me in the darkness, of voices whispering secrets I didn't want to keep. I'd wake up screaming, and my mother would run to my room, her face pale with concern. "¿Qué te pasa, mi amor? What's wrong?" she would ask, holding me against her chest. And every time, the truth would rise in my throat like bile, but I would swallow it back down. "Just a bad dream, Mommy," I would lie, because Roberto's warnings echoed in my head. "They won't believe you. They'll think you're a bad girl who makes up stories." At school, I became invisible. My grades plummeted from the best in class to barely passing. I stopped playing with other children during recess, instead sitting alone under the old saber tree, watching them laugh and run with an innocence I could barely remember having. Sister Esperanza called my mother for a conference. I remember sitting in that small classroom, my legs swinging from the wooden chair, listening to them discuss me as if I weren't there. "Carmen has changed," Sister Esperanza said, her voice full of concern. "She's distracted, sad. She used to be so bright, so eager to learn. Now it's like she's somewhere else entirely." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "Maybe it's the adjustment to having a new father," she said. "Roberto is so good to us. He's given us everything we needed. If only she knew what else he had given me." I tried to tell my grandmother once. Abuela Rosa was the wisest woman I knew, with hands that could heal any scrape and a voice that could calm any storm. During one of her visits, I sat beside her on the porch while she peeled plantains for dinner. "Abuela," I whispered, my heart pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it. What if someone touches you in places they shouldn't?" Her old hands paused, the knife suspended over the plantain. She looked at me with those deep brown eyes that had seen so much in her 70 years. "Mija," she said carefully, "if someone is hurting you, you must tell your mother immediately." "But what if no one believes you?" I asked, my voice barely audible. She pulled me close, smelling of café con leche and memories. "A grandmother always believes her granddaughter," she whispered. "Always." But before I could find the courage to say more, Roberto appeared in the doorway. "¿De qué hablan las mujeres de mi casa?" he asked with that charming smile that fooled everyone. "What are my ladies talking about?" "Just girl things," Abuela Rosa replied, but I saw something flicker in her eyes. A suspicion, perhaps. A grandmother's intuition. That night, Roberto's visit to my room was different. Rougher. More threatening. "I heard you talking to the old woman," He hissed in my ear. Remember what I told you, Carmen Rosa. Secrets are sacred. Breaking them brings terrible consequences. I learned to lock my bedroom door after that, but he had keys to every room in the house. I learned to stay awake until I heard him snoring, but exhaustion would eventually claim me. I learned to pray silently, begging God to make me invisible, to make Roberto forget I existed. But God seemed to have stopped listening to the prayers of little girls. By age 12, I had developed what the doctor called nervous stomach problems. I would double over in pain at random moments, my insides twisting like barbed wire. My mother took me to doctors, to curanderas, to anyone who might cure her daughter's mysterious illness. None of them diagnosed the real problem. That fear was eating me alive from the inside out. Roberto would sometimes bring me gifts after his visits to my room. A new dress, a book, once even a bicycle. My mother would clap her hands in delight. "Look how much your papa loves you," she would say. "We're so lucky to have him." Lucky. That word became like poison in my ears. I started cutting my hair short, wearing baggy clothes, trying to make myself less appealing, less noticeable. But predators don't hunt beauty, my friends. They hunt vulnerability. And I was the most vulnerable creature in that house. The worst part wasn't the physical violation. The worst part was the death of trust. The understanding that the world was not safe, that adults could lie, that mothers could be blind, and that little girls could disappear piece by piece without anyone noticing. I learned that silence can be more painful than screaming, because when we don't speak, the pain echoes inside us like thunder in an empty cave, growing louder and more destructive with each passing day. At 16, I finally found the courage to break the silence that had been suffocating me for 8 years. But I never imagined the price I would pay for speaking the truth. My dear friends, sometimes the people who should protect us become the ones who abandon us in our darkest hour. It was a Tuesday morning in March. I remember because the jacaranda trees were blooming purple outside our window, and my mother was humming Cielito Lindo while preparing breakfast. Roberto had left early for work, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe freely in my own home. But that morning was different. The night before, Roberto had been more aggressive than ever. Something inside me had finally broken, not bent, but completely shattered. I couldn't carry this secret for one more day. I watched my mother moving around the kitchen, her small hands cracking eggs into the pan, her face peaceful and content. She looked so fragile in the morning light, so trusting of the life she had built with Roberto. But I was drowning and I needed her to throw me a lifeline. "Mommy," I said, my voice trembling like a leaf in the wind, "I need to tell you something very important." She turned to me with a smile, wiping her hands on her apron. "¿Qué pasa, mi amor? Did you have another nightmare?" If only it had been just a nightmare. I took a deep breath, feeling like I was about to jump off a cliff. "It's about Roberto, about what he does to me when you're not here." The smile faded from her face instantly. Her hands went still. In that moment I saw something flicker in her eyes. Not surprise, not shock, but something that looked terrifyingly like guilt. "Carmen Rosa," she said slowly, sitting down across from me. "What are you trying to say?" The words came pouring out of me like water from a broken dam. 8 years of secrets, 8 years of shame, 8 years of stolen innocence. I told her everything. The touching, the threats, the games, the way he would whisper that it was our special secret. I told her about the fear that lived in my stomach like a cold stone, about the nightmares, about how I had tried so many times to tell her but couldn't find the words. As I spoke, I watched my mother's face change. Her skin grew pale, her hands began to shake, and tears started falling down her cheeks. For a moment I felt hope blooming in my chest. Finally, she knew. Finally, she would protect me. But then she said the words that would haunt me for the rest of my life. "I suspected," she whispered, unable to look me in the eyes. "Ay, Dios mío. I suspected something was wrong." You knew?" The words came out as barely a breath. "Not new exactly. But there were signs. The way you changed, the way you avoided him, your nightmares." She covered her face with her hands, sobbing. But I convinced myself I was imagining things. I told myself you were just being a difficult teenager. I felt like the ground had opened beneath my feet. If you suspected, why didn't you ask me? Why didn't you protect me? What she said next destroyed whatever was left of my childhood faith in my mother. Because Roberto provides for us, Carmen. Look around you. We have food. We have a roof. We have security. Before him, we had nothing. Where would we go? How would we survive? She reached for my hands, but I pulled away. I'm not saying what he did was right, mija. But life is complicated. Sometimes we have to make difficult choices. In that moment, my mother became a stranger to me. The woman who had sung me lullabies, who had held me when I was sick, who had taught me to pray, had chosen financial security over her daughter's safety. She had suspected her husband was abusing me and had chosen to look the other way. "You're my mother," I whispered, my voice breaking. "You were supposed to protect me." "I am protecting you," she said desperately. "This family, this home, it's all I can give you. Without Roberto, we'd be on the streets." I stood up from that kitchen table feeling like an orphan. My father had abandoned me, and now my mother had betrayed me. I was completely alone in the world. That afternoon, when Roberto came home from work, my mother told him about our conversation. I watched from my bedroom doorway as she spoke to him in hushed, urgent tones in their bedroom. Then I heard his footsteps approaching my room. He knocked gently, that same gentle knock that had terrified me for years. "Carmen Rosa," he called softly. "Can we talk?" When I didn't answer, he pushed the door open anyway. He sat on the edge of my bed, and I pressed myself against the wall, as far from him as possible. "Your mother told me about your concerns," he said, his voice calm and reasonable. "I think you've misunderstood some things, mija. Sometimes when we're growing up, we interpret innocent affection in the wrong way." "It wasn't innocent," I said, finding my voice. "You know exactly what you did to me." His mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw the predator underneath. But then he composed himself again. "Carmen, you're 16 now, old enough to understand that families have to stick together. What you think happened, it would destroy this family if you kept talking about it. Your mother would be devastated. We'd lose everything." He leaned closer, and I smelled that familiar combination of aftershave and threat. "Surely you don't want to hurt your mother like that." Even in his confession, he was manipulating me, making me responsible for keeping the family together, for protecting my mother's feelings, for preserving the lie that we were happy. That night, as I lay in my bed with the door locked and a chair pushed against it, I realized that my mother had made her choice. She had chosen Roberto's money over my safety, his convenience over my childhood, his presence over my peace. I was 16 years old, and I understood for the first time that being blood-related doesn't guarantee love, that mothers don't always protect their children, and that sometimes the family that hurts you is the same family that expects you to stay silent about it. From that day forward, I began planning my escape. I would survive until I turned 18, and then I would leave and never look back. I would build a life where no one could hurt me, where no one could choose their comfort over my safety. But the damage was done. The little girl who had once believed in fairy tales and happy endings was gone forever, replaced by someone harder, someone who knew that in this world you can only count on yourself. At 18, I left Colombia with one small suitcase and a heart full of both terror and determination. My dear friends, sometimes we must lose everything to discover who we really are, and sometimes the journey to healing begins with the courage to walk away from everything we've ever known. My escape was planned like a military operation. For 2 years, I had been saving every peso I could find. Coins dropped on the street, money from small jobs helping neighbors with sewing, even centavos I found in Roberto's pockets when my mother asked me to take his clothes to wash. My cousin Ana, my father's sister's daughter, had moved to Guatemala City 3 years earlier with her husband. We had exchanged letters secretly, and she was the only person who knew the truth about my situation. "Come to me, prima," she wrote. "Guatemala needs seamstresses, and I know you have golden fingers like your mother." The morning I left, my mother was hanging clothes on the roof. Roberto had gone to work early. It was perfect. I had learned to recognize perfect timing for survival. I left a letter on my pillow, short and direct. Mami, I cannot live in this house anymore. Don't look for me. I need to save myself since you couldn't save me. Maybe someday you'll understand. Carmen Rosa. The bus ride to Guatemala took 3 days. 3 days of watching the mountains of my childhood disappear behind me. 3 days of wondering if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. 3 days of praying to a God I wasn't sure was listening. I arrived in Guatemala City with nothing but my suitcase, Anna's address written on a piece of paper, and $43 in my pocket. The city was overwhelming, bigger than Medellín, full of sounds and smells and people who looked right through me as if I were invisible. Anna lived in Zone 7, in a small concrete house with her husband Miguel and their 2 babies. When she opened the door and saw me standing there, dusty from travel and shaking with exhaustion, she didn't ask questions. She just pulled me into her arms and said, "Bienvenida a casa, prima, welcome home." But home was something I had to build from scratch. The first months were brutal. I was undocumented, spoke Spanish with a Colombian accent that marked me as foreign, and had no skills except sewing and surviving. Anna helped me find work in a textile factory in Zone 12, where I sewed children's clothes for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. The factory was hot and airless, filled with the constant sound of sewing machines and the chatter of women from all over Central America. Most of us were running from something: poverty, violence, men who had hurt us. We didn't share our stories, but we recognized the shadows in each other's eyes. My supervisor was a woman named Esperanza, ironically enough. She was hard but fair, and after watching me work for 2 weeks, she pulled me aside. "You sew like your life depends on it," she said. "That's good, but you look over your shoulder like you're expecting someone to hurt you. That's not good. Whatever you're running from, mija, it's not here anymore." I lived in a tiny room behind Anna's house, barely big enough for a single bed and a small table. At night, I would sit by the small window and write in a notebook Anna had given me. I wrote about my dreams, my fears, my plans for the future. Writing became my way of emptying the poison from my soul. I enrolled in night school to finish my bachillerato. After working 12 hours at the factory, I would walk 40 minutes to the school, sit in those plastic chairs, and force my exhausted mind to learn mathematics, literature, history. The other students were mostly young men who looked at me with curiosity and sometimes desire. I wasn't ready for any of that. Roberto had stolen my ability to trust men, to feel safe in their presence. When classmates invited me for coffee or to study together, I would make excuses. My healing was like learning to walk again after being crippled. It had to happen slowly, carefully, one small step at a time. But Guatemala gave me something I had never had: the chance to discover who Carmen Rosa could be when she wasn't afraid. I discovered I was smart, really smart. My grades in night school were the highest in my class. I discovered I was strong, stronger than I had ever imagined. Working in that factory, supporting myself, studying at night, slowly learning to sleep without nightmares. All of this took a strength I didn't know I possessed. Most importantly, I discovered that I wasn't broken beyond repair. On Sundays, Anna would take me to the small Catholic church in our neighborhood. The priest, Father Tomas, was an old man with gentle eyes who had spent his life working with refugees and displaced people. After Mass, he would hold informal counseling sessions for anyone who needed to talk. It took me 6 months to find the courage to stay after one of those masses. "Father," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "what do you do when someone you trusted hurt you? What do you do when your own family failed to protect you?" He looked at me with those wise old eyes and said, "Misha, healing is not about forgetting what happened to you. It's about refusing to let what happened to you define what happens next." Those words became my prayer, my mantra, my North Star. Slowly I began to make friends among the women at the factory. Rosa from El Salvador, who had fled civil war. Marta from Honduras, who had escaped an abusive husband. Carmen from Mexico, who had lost her children to poverty and was working to bring them north. We were all broken in different ways, but we were also all fighting to rebuild ourselves. We formed a sisterhood of survivors, sharing meals, sharing stories, sharing the small victories and defeats of daily life. One evening, Rosa brought her guitar to work, and during our break, she played traditional songs from our different countries. When she played La Llorona, we all sang together, our voices blending in harmonies that spoke of shared pain and shared hope. In that moment, surrounded by these brave women who had also chosen survival over surrender, I realized something profound. I was not alone anymore. I was part of a community of women who understood that strength isn't about never falling down. It's about always getting back up. After 2 years in Guatemala, I had completed my bachillerato, been promoted to supervisor at the factory, and saved enough money to rent my own small apartment. I was 20 years old, completely independent, and for the first time in my life, I felt proud of myself. Distance had taught me that sometimes we need to lose everything to discover who we really are. And in that discovery, I found something Roberto had tried to steal from me but couldn't destroy: my own unbreakable spirit. Guatemala became my school of survival, my university of self-reliance, my laboratory for learning that healing is possible even when it seems impossible. And most importantly, it taught me that God speaks to us even in the darkest valleys, sometimes through the kindness of strangers, sometimes through our own unexpected strength, and sometimes through the simple miracle of waking up each morning and choosing to try again. I thought love could heal all wounds, but I learned that some scars follow us even to the altar. My dear friends, healing is not a destination we reach. It's a journey we walk every single day, sometimes hand in hand with people who choose to love us despite our brokenness. I was 23 when I met Carlos in Mexico City. I had moved there from Guatemala seeking better opportunities, working as a seamstress in a small shop near the Zócalo. Carlos was an electrician who came to fix the wiring in our building, a man with gentle hands and eyes that smiled before his mouth did. The first time he spoke to me, I instinctively stepped backward. My body still remembered to fear men's attention, to distrust their kindness. But Carlos noticed my reaction and immediately stepped back too, giving me space to breathe. "Perdón, señorita," he said softly. "I just wanted to ask if the lights in your shop have been flickering. I'm here to fix any electrical problems." His voice was nothing like Roberto's. It was gentle, respectful, without that undertone of possession that had haunted my childhood. Still, my heart raced as if I were facing danger. "Yes," I managed to whisper. "The lights flicker when it rains." He worked quietly that day, never asking personal questions, never lingering longer than necessary. But when he finished, he left a small paper flower on my sewing table, the kind children make from colorful tissue paper during Dia de los Muertos. "My little sister taught me to make these," he said shyly. "I thought it might brighten your workspace." That tiny gesture of innocent kindness cracked something open in my chest that had been frozen for years. Carlos began finding reasons to visit our building. A loose wire here, a burned-out bulb there. Each time, he would speak to me a little longer, always respecting the invisible wall I kept around myself, never pushing, never demanding. He told me about his family, his mother who sold tamales outside the cathedral, his 3 sisters who teased him mercilessly, his dream of opening his own electrical repair shop someday. His world seemed so normal, so untouched by the darkness I carried. "What about your family?" he asked one afternoon as he replaced a broken outlet. The question hit me like a physical blow. How could I explain that I had no family, that I had fled from the people who should have protected me, that the word family still tasted like betrayal in my mouth? "I don't have family," I said simply, focusing intently on my sewing. "Everyone has family," he said gently. "Not everyone," I replied, and something in my tone made him understand that this was not a topic for casual conversation. For 6 months, Carlos courted me with the patience of a saint. He brought me small gifts, never expensive, always thoughtful. A book of poetry by Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, a small cactus for my windowsill, because I had mentioned loving plants, but having no space for a garden. A recording of boleros, because he had heard me humming Bésame mucho while I worked. The first time he asked me to have dinner with him, I said no. The second time, I said no. The 10th time, I finally said yes, but only if we could eat at a restaurant with lots of people around us. That dinner was torture for me. Every time Carlos reached for the salt, I would flinch. When he leaned forward to hear me better over the mariachi music, my body would tense as if preparing for attack. He noticed everything but said nothing, just kept talking about safe topics, the weather, his work, funny stories about his sisters. Walking me home that night, he suddenly stopped under a streetlight. "Carmen," he said softly, "someone hurt you very badly, didn't they?" I wanted to deny it, to pretend I was normal, to be the kind of woman who could fall in love without shadows from the past haunting every moment. But something in his eyes, such gentle understanding, made the truth spill out of me. "Yes," I whispered. "Someone did. Do you want to tell me about it?" "No, not yet. Maybe not ever." He nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Then we'll take this as slowly as you need. There's no hurry, Carmen. Good things are worth waiting for." That night I cried myself to sleep, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that kindness still existed in the world. Our courtship lasted 2 years. 2 years of Carlos proving day by day that not all men were predators, that some men understood the word no, that some men valued a woman's comfort over their own desires. The first time he kissed me, I had a panic attack. My body remembered Roberto's forced kisses, his hands holding my face when I tried to turn away. Carlos immediately stepped back, his face full of concern and guilt. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have asked permission." "It's not your fault," I managed between gasps. "It's just, I need time." "We have all the time in the world," he said, and I believed him. When I finally told Carlos the whole truth about Roberto, about my mother's betrayal, about my years of running and hiding, he held me while I sobbed and said, "Thank you for trusting me with your story. It doesn't change how I feel about you. Nothing could change that." We married in a small ceremony at the church of San Juan Bautista. I wore a simple white dress that I had sewn myself, and Carlos wore his best suit with a red rose in his lapel. My bouquet was made of paper flowers like the first one he had given me, because real flowers die but paper flowers last forever. I had no family to invite, so Carlos's family became mine. His mother, Doña Elena, embraced me like her own daughter. His sisters included me in their gossip and their schemes. For the first time since childhood, I felt like I belonged somewhere. But marriage, my dear friends, doesn't erase trauma. It just gives you a safe space to heal. Our first months as husband and wife were difficult. I would wake up screaming from nightmares, and Carlos would hold me until the terror passed, never asking questions, just offering his steady presence. Intimate moments were a struggle. My body would freeze at unexpected touches, and Carlos learned to move slowly, to ask permission, to stop whenever I needed him to. "I feel broken," I confessed to him one night after another failed attempt at physical intimacy. "You're not broken," he said firmly. "You're healing, and healing takes time." We opened our small bakery when I was 27. Panaderia Rosa, we called it, after my grandmother who had tried to protect me when no one else would. Carlos handled the business side while I baked bread and pastries, pouring all my love and hope into every loaf, every empanada, every tres leches cake. Our children came later. Ana Sofia when I was 29, Miguel when I was 31. Holding my babies for the first time, I understood the fierce protective love that should exist between parent and child, the love my mother had failed to give me. I swore sacred oaths over their sleeping bodies. No one would ever hurt them the way I had been hurt. No one would ever choose anything over their safety and happiness. I would be the mother I had needed, the protector I had never had. From the outside, we looked like the perfect family. Successful business, beautiful children, a marriage built on genuine love and respect. But late at night, when Carlos slept peacefully beside me and our children dreamed their innocent dreams, I would sometimes touch the invisible scars Roberto had left on my soul and wonder if I would ever be completely free. Love, I learned, is not a magic cure for pain, but it is the gentle medicine that drop by drop heals the deepest wounds. And in Carlos's patient love, in my children's trust, in the life we built together with our own hands, I found something I thought Roberto had stolen forever, the ability to believe in goodness again. 25 years later, when I thought the past was buried forever, it came back to knock on my door with the force of a hurricane. My dear friends, sometimes God gives us the chance to face our demons when we're strong enough to defeat them, not when we're weak enough to be destroyed by them. It was a Tuesday evening in November. I remember because Ana Sofia had just started university, and Miguel was helping Carlos repair the oven at our bakery. We were living our beautiful, ordinary life, the life I had built with my own hands, brick by brick, dream by dream. I was kneading dough for the next morning's bread when the phone rang. Carlos answered, his voice cheerful as always. Panaderia Rosa, buenas noches. But then his expression changed. His face went pale, and he looked at me with eyes full of confusion and concern. It's for you, mi amor, he said quietly, holding out the phone. Someone from Colombia. She says she's your mother. The rolling pin fell from my hands and clattered to the floor. For 25 years, I had successfully buried Carmen Rosa from Medellín. I was Carmen González now, successful baker, devoted wife, protective mother. The terrified little girl with braided hair existed only in nightmares that came less and less frequently. But hearing those words, your mother, brought her rushing back like a flood. My hands shook as I took the phone. Hello? Carmen Rosa, came the voice I hadn't heard in decades, cracked with age and heavy with tears. Mija, is it really you? My mother, still alive, still calling me the pet name that once meant safety but had become associated with betrayal. What do you want? I asked, my voice colder than winter morning. Roberto is dying, she said, and I heard her crying on the other end of the line. He had a stroke 3 days ago. He's in the hospital and he keeps asking for you. Roberto, that name hit me like a physical blow. For 25 years, I had successfully not thinking about him, not wondering if he was alive or dead, not caring what had happened to the man who stole my childhood. Why would he ask for me? I said, though part of me already knew the answer. He says he needs to talk to you. He says he can't die with this guilt on his conscience. My mother's voice broke completely. Carmen Rosa, please. I know you have every right to hate us, but he's an old man now. He's 78, and the doctors say he doesn't have long. I looked across the kitchen at Carlos, who was watching me with deep concern. Ana Sofia had come downstairs, probably hearing the tension in my voice. Miguel had stopped working and was standing in the doorway, sensing that something was terribly wrong. This was my real family. These people who loved me, who had never hurt me, who had given me the life I deserved. Why should I risk disturbing our peace for the ghosts of my past? I have nothing to say to him, I told my mother, and I have nothing to say to you. Please, mija, just think about it. He's at Hospital San Vicente in Medellín, room 304. If you change your mind? I hung up without saying goodbye. That night I couldn't sleep. I told Carlos everything, about the phone call, about Roberto asking for me, about my mother's plea. Carlos held me while I cried angry tears, stroking my hair the way he had done for 25 years whenever the past threatened to drown me. What do you want to do? He asked quietly. I want to pretend this never happened, I said. I want to forget about them again. But can you? He asked gently. Can you really forget, knowing that he's dying and asking for you? That was the problem. I couldn't forget. For 3 days, I tried to go about my normal routine, baking bread, serving customers, helping Miguel with his homework, chatting with Ana Sofia about her university classes. But Roberto's voice echoed in my mind, and I found myself wondering what he could possibly want to say to me after all these years. On the 4th day, Ana Sofia found me crying over a batch of ruined empanadas. Mama, she said, sitting beside me at the kitchen table, I've never seen you like this. What's happening? I looked at my daughter, beautiful, intelligent, 21 years old, and full of confidence I had never possessed at her age. She had grown up safe, protected, loved unconditionally. She had never known fear in her own home, never had to keep terrible secrets, never had to choose between speaking truth and keeping peace. There are things about my past that I've never told you, I said carefully. Things that happened before I met your father, before I became the person you know. Tell me, she said simply. So I told her. I told both my children the story I'm telling you now, about Roberto, about my mother's betrayal, about my escape and the years of healing. They listened with tears in their eyes, holding my hands, understanding finally why I had always been so protective, why I had always insisted on knowing where they were and who they were with. You should go, Ana Sofia said when I finished. Not for him, but for you. You need to close this chapter of your life properly. Miguel nodded in agreement. We'll come with you, Mama. You won't have to face this alone. Carlos, my steady, patient Carlos, simply said, whatever you decide, we'll support you. But mija, sometimes we need to look our demons in the eye to realize they no longer have power over us. That night I called the airline and booked a flight to Medellín. After 25 years, I was going home. Not to the place where I had been broken, but as the woman I had become. Strong, successful, surrounded by people who loved me unconditionally. The flight to Colombia felt like traveling backward through time. As the plane descended over the mountains, I remembered from childhood, I pressed my face to the window and whispered a prayer. God, give me the strength to face what I need to face and the wisdom to leave behind what I need to leave behind. Carlos squeezed my hand. Remember, mi amor, you're not that frightened little girl anymore. You're Carmen Gonzalez, successful businesswoman, devoted mother, and the strongest woman I know. Nothing he says can change that. But as we landed in Medellín, as I breathed the familiar air of my homeland for the first time in decades, I felt all my carefully constructed defenses trembling. The past was about to meet the present, and I had no idea which one would prove stronger. Walking through that airport, I realized this wasn't just a visit to a dying man. This was a reckoning, a final confrontation between the child who had been violated and the woman who had survived. And whatever happened in that hospital room would either finally free me from the chains of my past or destroy the peace I had spent 25 years building. There's a moment in every woman's life when she must choose between keeping peace and demanding justice. My dear friends, after 25 years of silence, I was about to discover that sometimes the truth has more power than we ever imagined possible. The hospital San Vicente looked exactly as I remembered from my childhood visits. White walls, the smell of disinfectant, the sound of suffering echoing through endless corridors. But I was no longer the powerless little girl who had once walked these halls. I was Carmen Gonzalez, 45 years old, with my husband's strong hand in mine and 25 years of healing in my heart. Room 304 was at the end of a long hallway. With each step, I felt my past and present colliding inside my chest. Carlos walked beside me, steady as always, while Ana Sofia and Miguel flanked me like protective angels. You don't have to do this alone, Mama, Miguel whispered, squeezing my arm. But some battles, my dear friends, we must fight by ourselves. I pushed open the door, and there he was, Roberto, the monster from my nightmares, the thief of my innocence, the man who had haunted my dreams for decades. Except he wasn't a monster anymore. He was just an old man, shrunken and gray, connected to machines that beeped steadily in the quiet room. His hair was white and thin. His skin was yellow like old paper. And his eyes, those eyes that had once filled me with terror, were now filled with something I had never seen there before. Shame. My mother sat in a chair beside his bed, aged beyond her 70 years, her face carved with lines of guilt and regret. When she saw me, she began to cry. "Carmen Rosa," she whispered. "You came." "I came," I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake in my chest. "But not for you, and not for him." Roberto turned his head slowly toward my voice. When he saw me, His eyes widened with what looked like relief and terror combined. "Carmen," he said, his voice barely a whisper. I approached his bed slowly, like approaching a wounded animal that might still bite. But as I got closer, I realized something profound. I was no longer afraid of him. This weak, dying man who had once seemed so powerful, so threatening, was now completely at my mercy. "You asked to see me," I said, standing at the foot of his bed. "Here I am." He struggled to find words, his voice broken by age and illness. "I need to ask for your forgiveness." The words hung in the air like smoke. Forgiveness. After everything he had done, after years of terror, after my mother's betrayal, after decades of healing from wounds he had inflicted, he wanted forgiveness. "Do you know what you're asking me to forgive?" I asked, my voice growing stronger with each word. He closed his eyes, tears leaking from the corners. "Yes, I know. What I did to you, it was unforgivable. I was sick, Carmen. I was a monster." "You were," I agreed. "But being sick doesn't excuse what you did. Being sorry now doesn't erase 25 years of nightmares." My mother stood up from her chair. "Carmen Rosa, please. He's dying. Can't you find it in your heart?" "No," I cut her off, my voice sharp as broken glass. "You don't get to ask me for anything. You lost that right when you chose him over me." I turned back to Roberto, and suddenly, all the words I had never been able to say came pouring out of me like a dam bursting. "Do you want to know what the worst part was, Roberto? It wasn't just what you did to me in that house. It wasn't just the touching, the threats, the way you stole my childhood piece by piece. The worst part was living in a world where everyone saw you as a good man, where you were respected in the community, where people praised my mother for finding such a wonderful husband." His face crumpled with shame, but I wasn't finished. "The worst part was learning that my own mother suspected what you were doing and chose your money over my safety. The worst part was being an 8-year-old girl who had to choose between speaking the truth and keeping the family together. Do you understand what that does to a child's soul?" "Yes," he whispered. "Yes, I understand. And I'm sorry. I'm so, so sorry." "Your sorry doesn't give me back my innocence," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "Your sorry doesn't erase the years I spent learning to trust again, learning to love again, learning to believe that not all men are predators. Your sorry doesn't heal the damage you did to my ability to feel safe in my own body." Carlos had moved closer, ready to support me if I needed it, but I held up my hand. This was my moment, my reckoning. "But do you know what, Roberto?" I said, leaning closer to his bed. "I survived you. I escaped. I built a beautiful life with a man who treats me like a queen, with children who will never know the fear I knew, with a business that feeds families throughout our neighborhood. I became everything you tried to prevent me from becoming." Roberto was crying openly now, his whole body shaking with sobs. "I documented everything," I said quietly, and his eyes flew open in terror. "Every date, every detail, everything you did to me for 8 years. I wrote it all down during my healing process. I still have those journals." "Please," he gasped. "Please don't destroy my reputation. I have grandchildren now. I have a name in the community. The same community where you were respected while I carried your secrets like poison," I asked. "The same reputation that mattered more than an 8-year-old girl's safety." I looked around the room, at my mother, twisted with guilt, at Roberto, finally seeing the consequences of his actions, at my own family, witnessing the strength I had built from the ashes of my childhood. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice calm and clear. "I'm going to tell the truth. Not for revenge, but because secrets protect predators and silence protects evil. I'm going to speak at churches, at schools, wherever they'll listen. I'm going to make sure that other little girls know they can speak up, that they will be believed, that their safety matters more than keeping family peace." Roberto's face went white. "Carmen, please. I'm going to establish a foundation for survivors of childhood abuse," I continued. "And I'm going to use my story, our story, to make sure that what happened to me never happens to another child in silence." My mother fell back into her chair, understanding finally that the secret she had helped keep for decades was about to become public. But first, I said, looking directly into Roberto's eyes, I need you to understand something. I'm not doing this to destroy you. I'm doing this to free myself completely from the power you've held over me for 40 years. Truth is like light, Roberto. It may hurt at first, but only in the light can we see the path to real healing. That afternoon, I walked out of that hospital room not as the victim I had been, but as the victor I had become. The little girl with braided hair had finally found her voice, and the world was about to hear her roar. Behind me, I left a dying man who would spend his final days facing the truth about who he really was. And for the first time in my life, that felt like justice. My grandmother used to say that God's justice arrives slowly but always arrives, and I witnessed this truth with my own eyes. My dear friends, sometimes what we think is revenge is actually divine justice working through the natural consequences of our choices. 3 days after our confrontation in the hospital, I kept my word. I walked into the Igreja do Sagrado Corazón, the same church where Roberto had been a respected member for 30 years, where he had shaken hands with the priest every Sunday while harboring the darkest secrets in his heart. The church was packed for evening service. Word had spread through the neighborhood that Carmen Rosa Morales had returned after 25 years, and curiosity had filled every pew. I sat in the front row with Carlos, Ana Sofia, and Miguel, waiting for Father Hernandez to invite testimonies. As was the tradition, when my turn came, I walked to the altar with legs that trembled but a voice that was steady as stone. "My name is Carmen Rosa Morales," I began, looking out at faces I remembered from childhood. "Many of you knew me as the little girl who lived with Maria and her husband Roberto. Today I want to tell you the truth about what happened in that house for 8 years. The silence that followed was so complete, you could hear angels breathing. I told them everything. About the abuse that started when I was 8, about my mother's willful blindness, about the years of fear and shame, about my escape and the decades of healing it took to become whole again. As I spoke, I watched faces change throughout the congregation. Shock, horror, disbelief, and then slowly recognition. Other women began to nod. Some began to cry. I realized I wasn't the only one who had carried terrible secrets in this community. When I finished, the church remained silent for what felt like eternity. Then, an elderly woman named Esperanza stood up in the back. "I believe you," she said, her voice shaking, "because the same thing happened to my granddaughter, and when she tried to tell us, we didn't listen because Roberto was such a good man." One by one, other voices joined hers. A mother whose daughter had complained about Uncle Roberto's games. A teacher who had noticed changes in children from families where Roberto did electrical work. A social worker who had suspected but never investigated because Roberto was so respected in the community. By the end of that evening, the perfect reputation Roberto had built over decades lay in ruins. The truth, once released, spread through Medellín like wildfire. By morning, everyone knew that the community pillar, the generous neighbor, the devoted husband, was actually a predator who had hidden in plain sight for 30 years. The next day, I returned to the hospital to find Roberto's room in chaos. His blood pressure had spiked during the night. The machines around his bed beeped frantically, and nurses moved with urgent efficiency. "What happened?" I asked the doctor. "He had another stroke," Dr. Ramirez explained quietly. Much more severe than the first. The stress, the emotional shock, his body simply couldn't handle it. I looked at Roberto lying there, now paralyzed from the waist down, barely conscious, completely dependent on others for his most basic needs. The man who had used his physical strength to overpower a child was now powerless himself. My mother sat beside his bed, looking smaller and older than her 70 years. When she saw me, her eyes filled with a mixture of shame and desperate hope. "The whole neighborhood knows," she whispered. "People are calling me, asking how I could have let this happen. Some are angry, some are supportive, but everyone knows." "Good," I said simply. "Darkness only has power in secrecy. In the light, it dies." Roberto's eyes fluttered open when he heard my voice. His mouth moved, trying to form words, but no sound came out. The stroke had stolen his voice. How fitting that the man who had silenced me for years was now silenced himself. Over the next week, as news of Roberto's true nature spread throughout Medellín, his constructed life completely unraveled. Former neighbors stopped visiting. His electrical repair business lost all its customers overnight. Even some family members distanced themselves, finally admitting they had suspected but chosen to remain silent. But something beautiful also began to happen. Women started coming forward, not just in our neighborhood but throughout the city. My testimony had given them permission to speak their own truths, to name their own abusers, to break their own decades of silence. I received dozens of letters, phone calls, visits from survivors who said my courage had given them courage. A network of healing began to form. Women supporting women, children finding their voices, families finally choosing truth over comfortable lies. Father Hernandez visited me at the hotel where we were staying. "Carmen," he said, his face heavy with regret, "I need to ask for your forgiveness too. How many times did Roberto sit in my confessional? How many times did I see him as a model parishioner? I should have seen the signs. I should have protected you." "Father," I replied gently, "predators are experts at hiding their true nature. They choose their masks carefully. But now you know. Now you can protect other children." A week later, Roberto's condition worsened dramatically. The second stroke had damaged his brain severely, and the doctors said his organs were beginning to shut down. My mother called me at 2 a.m. crying. "He's dying, Carmen Rosa. He's dying, and I think he's terrified of what comes next." I found Roberto in his hospital bed, conscious but barely responsive. His eyes, once so threatening, now held nothing but fear and pain. This man who had terrorized my childhood was now afraid of his own approaching death. Looking at him lying there, helpless and broken, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not revenge, but a deep, profound emptiness where my hatred used to live. For 40 years, Roberto had occupied space in my mind, my heart, my nightmares. Even in my healing, he had been there, the shadow I was recovering from, the monster I was learning not to fear. But seeing him like this, reduced to nothing more than a dying body filled with regret, I realized he had never been the powerful figure my child's mind had created. He had always been just a broken man who chose to break others rather than heal himself. My mother approached me carefully as if I might disappear again. "Carmen Rosa," she said softly, "I know I have no right to ask this, but could you find it in your heart to forgive him, so he can die in peace?" I looked at this woman who had given me life but failed to protect it, who had chosen security over her daughter's safety, who was now asking me to offer grace to the man who had destroyed my childhood. "Mama," I said quietly, "forgiveness isn't something I give to him. Forgiveness is something I give to myself." That night, as Roberto struggled with each breath, I sat beside his bed and made a decision that would change everything, not just for him, not just for my mother, but for me. It was time to complete my healing by releasing the last chains that bound me to this painful past. Forgiveness is not a gift we give to those who hurt us, but the key that frees us from the prison of our own pain. My dear friends, what I'm about to tell you might be the hardest part of my story to understand, but it's also the most important lesson of my entire life. It was Roberto's final night. The doctors had said he wouldn't survive until morning. His breathing was labored, his body was shutting down, and the machines monitoring his vital signs painted a picture of a man whose time on earth was ending. I sat alone in that hospital room at 3 a.m., watching this dying man who had shaped so much of my life through his cruelty. Carlos had offered to stay with me, but I knew this was something I needed to face by myself. Roberto's eyes opened one last time, and when he saw me sitting there, tears began to flow down his cheeks. "Carmen," he whispered so quietly I had to lean close to hear him. Why are you here?" "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Maybe because someone needs to witness the end of this story." I'm going to hell, aren't I?" he asked, his voice filled with terror. For what I did to you, for all the children I hurt. I'm going to hell. Looking at this terrified, dying man, I felt something shift inside my chest. For 40 years, I had carried the weight of his sins along with my own pain. I had let his actions define not just my childhood, but my entire understanding of justice, of men, of family, of God. But sitting there in that quiet room, I realized something profound. Roberto was already in hell. He had been in hell every day since he made the choice to hurt innocent children. The fear in his eyes, the guilt that had eaten him alive, the destruction of everything he thought he had built, this was hell on earth, and I didn't want to be in hell with him anymore. Roberto, I said softly, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully. He turned his head toward me with effort, his eyes wide with desperate attention. What you did to me was evil. It destroyed my childhood, shattered my trust, and caused pain that lasted decades. Nothing you say tonight can change that. Nothing you say can give me back what you stole. He nodded, more tears falling. But, I continued, and this word hung between us like a bridge, I'm not going to let your evil actions continue to poison my life. I'm not going to carry your guilt anymore. I'm not going to let the hatred I felt for you consume even one more day of the beautiful life I've built. Roberto's eyes widened with something that looked like hope mixed with disbelief. I forgive you, I said, and the words came out clear and strong, surprising even me. Not because you deserve it, not because saying sorry now erases 40 years of pain, but because I deserve to be free from the hatred that's been eating at my soul since I was 8 years old. Something miraculous happened in that moment. It was as if a weight I had carried for so long that I forgot it was there suddenly lifted from my shoulders. The knot of anger that had lived in my chest for decades simply dissolved. Thank you, Roberto whispered, his voice breaking. Thank you. I'm not doing this for you, I said firmly. I'm doing this for me, for my children, for my husband, for the life I want to live going forward. Forgiveness is not about forgetting or pretending what you did was okay. It's about choosing freedom over bondage. I leaned closer to his bed, and for the first time in my life, I felt no fear in his presence. Roberto, in your final hours, I want you to understand something important. The children you hurt, we survived you. We grew up. We found love. We built beautiful lives despite what you did to us. Your evil did not win. I know, he whispered. I know, and I'm glad. I'm glad you survived. I'm glad you found happiness. There's something else, I continued. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure that what happened to me never happens to another child in silence. I'm going to use my story to protect others. So in a strange way, your evil is going to create good in the world. Light really does overcome darkness. Roberto closed his eyes, and I saw something like peace cross his face for the first time. Carmen, he said, his voice now barely audible, if there's anything after this, I promise I'll spend eternity trying to make up for what I did. Focus on this life, I said gently. Use whatever time you have left to truly repent. Not just feeling sorry, but truly changing your heart. That's between you and God now. I stood up to leave, but Roberto called my name one last time. Will you pray for me? He asked. I paused at the door, considering this request from the man who had made my childhood a nightmare. Yes, I said finally. I'll pray that God has mercy on your soul, and I'll pray that the children you hurt find the same peace I found tonight. I walked out of that hospital room as a completely different person than the one who had walked in. The Carmen who entered was still carrying chains from her past. The Carmen who left was finally, completely free. Roberto died 2 hours later as the sun was rising over Medellín. My mother called to tell me, expecting me to feel, I don't know what she expected, relief, satisfaction, victory. Instead, I felt something I had never experienced before, complete peace. The man who had haunted my dreams for 40 years was gone, and with him went the last of my anger, the last of my hatred, the last of my need for revenge. In choosing to forgive him, I had chosen to forgive myself for carrying his poison for so long. At Roberto's funeral 3 days later, I did something that shocked everyone. I attended, not to celebrate his death, but to witness the end of a chapter that had defined too much of my life. The church was nearly empty. Word of his crimes had spread throughout the community, and few people wanted to be associated with his memory. But I sat in the back pew with Carlos, watching as my mother and a handful of relatives said goodbye to a man whose true nature had finally been revealed. During the service, I didn't pray for Roberto's soul. I had already done that. Instead, I prayed in gratitude. Gratitude for my survival, for my healing, for my family, for the strength to forgive, and for the understanding that our worst experiences can become our greatest sources of wisdom and compassion. After the funeral, my mother approached me hesitantly. "Carmen Rosa," she said, her voice shaking, "I don't expect you to forgive me. I know what I did was unforgivable. I failed you when you needed me most. I looked at this broken woman who had given me life but failed to protect it, and I realized that my forgiveness of Roberto had prepared my heart for this moment too. Mama," I said softly, "I forgive you too. Not because you were right, but because holding on to anger would only hurt me now. We can't change the past, but we can choose how we move forward." She collapsed into my arms, sobbing with relief and gratitude, and for the first time in 40 years, I hugged my mother without resentment poisoning the moment. Forgiveness, my dear friends, is not weakness. It's the strongest thing a human being can do. When I chose to forgive Roberto and my mother, I didn't free them from their guilt. I freed myself from my pain. And in that freedom, I found something more valuable than revenge could ever give me: absolute peace. Today, at 65 years old, I can say with absolute certainty that every tear, every night of anguish, every moment of pain led me to the purpose God had planned for my life. My dear sisters and brothers who are listening to this story, if this old woman could transform the worst nightmare of her childhood into her greatest mission, believe that God also has a plan for your pain. It's been 15 years since Roberto's death, and the life I've built since then has been more beautiful than anything I could have imagined when I was that terrified little girl hiding in her bedroom in Medellín. Carlos and I celebrated our 40th wedding anniversary last month. Our bakery in Mexico City now employs 23 people, most of them women who needed a second chance. Survivors like myself who found healing through meaningful work and genuine community. Ana Sofia is now a successful lawyer specializing in cases involving children's rights, and Miguel teaches music to underprivileged youth. They gave us 6 grandchildren who call me Abuela Carmen and fill our home with the kind of laughter I never heard as a child. But the most important work of my life began the day I walked out of that hospital room in Medellín, carrying forgiveness in my heart instead of hatred. Within a month of returning to Mexico, I received over 300 letters from women across Latin America who had heard my story. Women from Colombia, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Venezuela, Argentina, all telling me that my courage to speak had given them courage to break their own silences. Maria Elena from Guatemala City wrote, "Carmen, I am 57 years old, and I have never told anyone that my uncle abused me for 6 years. Hearing your story made me realize it's never too late to heal." Rosa from San Salvador wrote, "I have 3 daughters, and after hearing your testimony, I finally understood why my oldest daughter has been having nightmares. I confronted my husband, and he confessed. Thank you for teaching me to choose my children over my comfort." Each letter broke my heart and healed it at the same time. I realized that my story wasn't just about my own healing. It was about creating a path for other women to find their way out of darkness. That's when Carlos suggested something that changed everything. "Mi amor, what if we started a foundation? What if we used our story to help other families heal?" 3 years after Roberto's death, we established the Fundación Esperanza Carmen, Hope Foundation Carmen. We began with our own savings and the profits from our bakery, but soon donations started pouring in from all over Latin America and the United States, from people who understood that preventing childhood abuse requires entire communities working together. Today, our foundation operates in 12 countries. We provide free therapy for survivors, legal support for families seeking justice, educational programs for communities, and safe houses for children who need to escape dangerous situations. But our most important work happens in churches, schools, and community centers, where I share my story and teach people to recognize the signs of abuse, to believe children when they speak, and to choose protection over reputation. Last month, I spoke at a church in El Salvador, where a 70-year-old woman named Dolores approached me afterward. "Señora Carmen," she said, tears streaming down her face, "I am a grandmother, and my granddaughter told me something terrible about her stepfather. Before hearing your story, I might have told her to keep quiet to preserve the family, but because of you, I called the police instead. These are the moments that make every painful memory worth it. Every time a child is protected because someone listened to my story, Roberto's evil is transformed into good. Every time a mother chooses her child's safety over family peace, the little girl I used to be finds another piece of healing. I've also reconnected with my roots in Colombia. My mother and I spent her final 5 years rebuilding our relationship. She died 2 years ago, at 87, but before she passed, she spent countless hours volunteering with our foundation, using her own story of failure to teach other mothers the importance of protecting their children. "Carmen Rosa," she said to me on her deathbed, "I failed you as a child, but maybe I can help other children by admitting my failure." Even in her last breath, my mother found redemption. 3 months ago, I returned to my old neighborhood in Medellín for the first time since Roberto's funeral. The community that once saw him as a pillar of respectability now has a small school named in honor of children's safety, funded by our foundation. Standing in front of the house where my nightmare began, I felt no fear, no anger, no sadness. Instead, I felt profound gratitude. That little house had been the beginning of my pain, but it had also been the beginning of my strength. I visited the Comuna 13, where murals now cover the walls with messages of hope and resilience. Young artists paint stories of transformation, of communities choosing healing over violence, of people like me who survived and decided to help others survive too. One mural particularly moved me. It showed a little girl with braided hair holding hands with an older woman, both of them walking toward the light. At the bottom, someone had painted the words, "From victim to victor, from pain to purpose." That's exactly what happened to me, my dear friends. I went from being Roberto's victim to being a victor over trauma, from carrying pain to carrying purpose. But I want you to understand something crucial. My healing didn't happen overnight. It took decades of therapy, countless nights of Carlos holding me through nightmares, thousands of prayers, and the daily choice to believe that love is stronger than evil. There were setbacks, days when the depression felt overwhelming, moments when I questioned whether sharing my story was worth the pain of reliving it, times when I wondered if forgiveness had been a mistake. But every time I wanted to give up, I remembered that little girl with braided hair who thought she was alone in the world. I remembered all the other little girls and boys who still think they're alone, and I found the strength to continue. Today, as I record this story for you, I want to leave you with the most important message of my life. If you are carrying pain from your past, know that it's never too late to begin healing. Whether you are 20 or 80, whether your trauma happened last year or 50 years ago, you have the power to choose healing over hatred, purpose over poison. If you are a parent or grandparent, please listen to your children. Believe them when they tell you difficult truths. Choose their safety over your comfort, their protection over your reputation. Be the adult you needed when you were vulnerable. If you are a survivor like me, know that your story has power. Your healing can become someone else's hope. Your courage to speak can give voice to those who are still silent. And if you are someone who has hurt others, know that true repentance requires more than sorry words. It requires changed actions, making amends where possible, and dedicating your life to preventing the same harm from happening to others. My dear friends, God wastes nothing, not our pain, not our mistakes, not our darkest moments. He takes the broken pieces of our lives and creates something beautiful, if we let Him. I am 65 years old, and every day I wake up grateful. Grateful for Carlos's patient love, for my children's trust, for my grandchildren's innocence, for the privilege of helping other survivors find their way to healing. But most of all, I'm grateful that the scared little girl who once thought she was powerless grew up to become a woman who helps other children find their power. That's the real victory, my friends. Not revenge against those who hurt us, but the transformation of our wounds into wisdom, our scars into strength, our pain into purpose. Remember, you are never alone in your healing journey. Subscribe to this channel if my story has given you hope, and share in the comments what lesson you're taking from my experience. Together we can break the silence that protects predators and build communities that protect children. Until we meet again, may God bless your brave hearts and guide you toward the healing you deserve. Remember, it's never too late to choose freedom. It's never too late to choose forgiveness. And it's never too late to discover that your deepest wounds can become your greatest source of strength to help others. Thank you for walking this journey with me. You are loved, you are valuable, and your story matters.